Tommaso Valletti, very well welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. Thank you very much for the second opportunity to invite you and to learn from you your opinions on the development of competition law, economics, and policy in 2025 and looking ahead. I wanted to start with a post which you have made on LinkedIn with very, alarming message, kind of rock and roll is dead and I'm still alive. The title is competition policy dead? Please
Right,
develop.
right. So, hi, Oles, and thank you for having me, and thank you for doing all this series of interviews. It's a very valuable public good that you are supplying to the community. So that was an idiosyncratic post, as it often happens on my side, but it offers my honest views about what I think about competition policy in the year and years to come, after having observed the last few years, having been involved in this space. So I do think that competition policy in Europe, the US, I know a bit less, but in Europe, by Europe, I mean both the European Commission and the UK, is virtually moribund. It's not in a healthy space. And I expect less and less enforcement in this space for the next few years. And why is that? This is because at the political level, we have finally realized, which is a good thing, that Europe, both the EU and the UK, are not in a good space when it comes to our productivity, our resilience, and a lot of the things we talk about. So we had the reports, the Letta first, the Draghi, similar initiatives in the UK coming more from the political level, from the new Labour government, highlighting that. And that's helpful. That's a healthy warning. But then the recipes that we've been given when it comes to competition are an illusion which is basically, nobody's saying that explicitly, but is as if through competition policy, we gave such an impediment to an amazing growth that otherwise the continent, the European continent, would have had. That this is something that the politicians are fooling themselves with. But there is a simple recipe, and the simple recipe is giving directions, explicit directions to the authorities by saying you need to scale and you need to allow for all the mergers and don't interfere, don't regulate, don't do that, don't. Of course, there are some examples where this is true, but by and large, this is not the problem of Europe, and this is not the problem of the UK. There are many other problems. But this interference has happened, and we already see the effects. And the effects is, we may discuss about it, but in the country I'm based, in the mobile merger between Vodafone and Three, clearly there was a political interference with the case. Of course, the regulators wouldn't call it interference, they would call it a steer, but we will have lots of negotiations, explicit, implicit, behind doors or not. Also, the message that Starmer gave to all the regulators in this country, from the financial sector to competition, is also as clear as the example of the mobile merger shows. And same thing in Europe. In Europe, you see it in a less direct way, but the messages from the Draghi report are quite clear. You don't need to do a lot of exegesis on what it means and what it does, and it's really clearly saying that mergers should be allowed. Maybe we can do something exposed, which is never going to happen. And they're highlighting even some sectors, including telecoms and others, as possible sectors where we are expecting more consolidation. The effect of this has been the renaming, revamping, new mission of DG Comp, which has been given through the new Commissioner Ribera, a different mandate that we may want to talk about, emphasizing on the green agenda, on environmental stuff, which will divert attention away from more traditional areas of antitrust enforcement. So I do expect much less antitrust enforcement at the EU level as well.
I think that the classical understanding, how to say, modern understanding of competition policy perceived in a kind of stable environment, rather homogeneous and rather not having any external communication with other jurisdictions, is that the more you enforce, the better. It's kind of yes or no. You identify instance of infringement and you have to respond. The quicker, the better, the more, the better. Whereas it appears that these days it's not yes or no. It's like you are a sound recorder having so many different options of moving up and down, shifting the priorities. Should competition policy be more proactive, and should the mandate go beyond preventing anti-competitive actions and trying to create competition? Is it, or it's beyond even the possibilities which the enforcers have?
Well, they don't have the resources, they don't have the guts, they don't have the political will to do that, because I mean, we are in a phase, and we need to bring into the picture the US and China as well, where politics is back with a vengeance. The technocrats have failed to deliver a stable economy that everybody is happy with. And so there is a backlash against the technocrats. The technocrats are defending their jobs. They're defending their jobs by trying to do what the politicians are telling them to say. So this is what you observe. I don't see lots of thinking coming from the enforcers' side, because probably they're scared. They're scared. There have been some turning points. A couple of years ago, Microsoft Activision was clearly a point where there was an over active enforcer that the politicians didn't like, and these companies with unprecedented powers told them to bugger off, essentially, no? Which is what they did. And so this was something that taught a hard lesson to one particular enforcer, but I can mention others. So the enforcers are just gonna, so in a sense, it's fine that politics gives a direction, I would hope. People have elected governments with certain agendas and having political priorities, which may also direct the enforcers, is absolutely fine. This is what democracy is about. Unfortunately, though, now almost anything goes, because this model works where there is good information, where there are symmetric resources in society, with you listen to the views of alternative stakeholders. Instead, now the conversation is dominated by big corporates in the antitrust arena. So elsewhere it may be different, but not in antitrust. I haven't seen any change there. So you see one-sided conversation, which are just going, you know, the corporates talk to the politicians direct the enforcers to allow everything to go through, which will be dangerous. So this is the illusion I referred to initially of the politicians. They will find themselves 4 or 5 years from now with economies which are even more concentrated, which are even less resilient, which are even more dominated by some foreign companies, companies based in foreign countries which may not be friendly any longer. And this is a risk for democracy. It's a huge risk which I see. So enforcers, in that sense, should try to stick to their guns, because they have a mission to accomplish. Because otherwise, our economies are going in dictatorial directions. I'm very concerned about.
Okay, you are one of those rare persons who combines this excellent academic profile and impact and visibility and presence, research overall, and also having this first-hand experience and being policy maker, policy shaper, taking a leading role in DG as chief economist. So you know the institutional thinking, so to say, the institutional DNA of the enforcers, at least some of European enforcers. Let's leave aside CMA, or maybe also including CMA. So I wanted to understand, do you think that the enforcers know what to do and they are prevented by politicians to do things? or it's this kind of the death of competition policy is kind of existential nature, that we ourselves are a little bit perplexed with this cacophony of so rapidly kaleidoscopically changing reality?
Well, it's difficult to go into these binary divisions, but I do think that enforcers are typically well motivated. They are incredibly under-resourced. They're not gonna fight many battles. They cannot. They don't want to. There is also revolving doors. If it doesn't go well with the regulator, the only option they have left is to go back to the consultant. So you're not going to be going too much against the companies and their advocates, which are dominating the discourse, because they may be your employer 5 years from now. So they are a bit afraid, I should say. Or you need some leadership, which sometimes exists if there are some strong individuals, but it's not in the DNA of the institution. The institution, DG Comp in particular, preserves itself. This is just my personal experience, so I don't want to overgeneralize my claims, but my attempt to become a critical voice was also, having observed things, was also in part motivated by, well, to a large extent motivated in order to improve things. And I never had the perception that DGCOM welcomed my contribution. So with one exception, which was a very nice academic seminar that I gave last September since I left the commission, which is, what, 5.5 years ago, I never had any official interaction with DG Comp. So they just wouldn't talk to a person like me because they see, I don't know, betrayal, critique is not welcome, even constructive critique. I would imagine they would say, no, it's not true. We're always welcoming different opinions, etc. But my experience doesn't talk to that effect. So the direction of the interaction has been like closed doors, effectively. So I don't see a big overwhelming reaction coming from the institutions to those of us, those few of us, I should say, that tried with a different approach, a different jargon, a different language also, because problem of antitrust is its own silos mentality. And in that sense, I was so happy to see the revolution coming, at least for the past 4 years, from the US, which has been, apart from the quality of the cases, it's been the change in language that the administrations of the Biden administration with Cantor and Khan managed to do, which was talking to citizens, talking to other stakeholders, which are not the usual ones. So this would have been my hope for competition policy in the future, trying to think not about narrow cases, not about narrow theories of harm that you have to do in some instances, but trying to understand what matters to society at a deeper level. And this is conceptually where I think, as an orthodox economy, I do think that a massive injection of competition is what we need. Sometimes competition has to be managed by some regulators, by some subsidies, because otherwise industries don't start by themselves. But other than that, we need much more competition, which is definitely a battle which I've lost big time. So all the direction coming from politics now is instead to allow for further concentration, so which is orthogonal to what I think 100%. So I'm very pessimistic.
So revolving doors. I remember you've been telling few anecdotal evidence from your experience to communicating with officials in other mature jurisdictions, where they pretty much explicitly were saying about their plans after finishing their mandate in an antitrust enforcement agency to move on to consultancy or legal big law firm. It's kind of a systemic. It became a kind of new normality, saying, "Well, I have big plans and many big family and stuff." How is it somewhere in the kind of in the life plan of a typical enforcer or a significant part of the enforcers, and how visible the impact is on the job they are doing?
So that anecdote is absolutely true. It was somebody, a very nice person, because individuals are nice often, but what I was saying explicitly, it was a high official at the DOJ before Jonathan Cantor, saying, I'm just waiting for a good offer because I got two kids in college and the college fees are very expensive. So I really need to go to a big law firm. So, but this is endemic. It's endemic. It's endemic. It does reflect on but it's also at the CMA. And we shouldn't think that revolving doors are much bigger in the US than in the UK. This is what I already said earlier. That so your job in the institutions, your job in with the enforcers sometimes is going to face some ceilings because not everybody can be promoted to a director position, to a top. So there's limited places, and if you don't get there, and if you're ambitious, then the only alternative, unfortunately, for these people is to go back to big law, or if you're lawyers, or to the economic consultancies. And this is going to shape your work. This is going to shape your work because you're never going to do something which is too abrasive against your possible future employers. So this is something that can be ameliorated, not fixed, in different ways. Potentially better salaries among enforcers, but it's not coming because we are under budget deficits. But although some jobs are well paid also among the enforcers, ethics, so principles, the value, the mission of your work is something that should be clear, and it may give lots of enjoyment and satisfaction to some people, as it does. That was my case at DG for instance. I really loved to be to work for that Directorate General. The other one is to put limits on, but effective limits on the cases I can work on for the next 3 to 5 years, and this is not enough now. So yes, on the surface, I'm not going to work on this case, on that case, but then you can provide a different kind of feedback, and usually the time periods are far too short. But there are and transparency and all this, which we've been advocating for years, but it's not yet happening. And this is not, there are no penalties. So you see a lot of examples where these rules are actually violated. And historically, maybe because of preferences, because of different values, I don't know, there was less revolving doors at the European level in DG Comp, but this is changing there as well. So the recent experiences of top officials of DG Comp going back into the private sector is telling me that we are on the same path as the United States and possibly the UK. So whatever I say, I see the opposite direction of what I would like to have seen, which is taking place. So I'm much less concentrated in my research and in my policy views on competition policy now because I had enough. I had enough of losing battles. There was one day a few months ago when a person that knows me very well and was my wife, she said, Tommaso, but some years ago when you were at DG Comp, yes, you were very busy, but you were excited. You had lots of ideas and you were fighting and you were really, thriving in that, and I could see that you enjoyed it. Although there was a cost because I could spend less time with my family. But now I said, when you are still doing these things, less than in the past, of course, but sometimes I see you are unhappy. Okay. And so you should be doing something that makes you happy. And this is something which is key to me. Nobody is forcing me. Because of my job, I have other stuff to do. Nobody is forcing me to be doing competition policy. I believe it's an important thing. I sometimes believe I have something to say, but I had enough of being unhappy. So it's like in a boxing match. Every time I get a punch, it takes me longer to get back on my feet. So I will get back on my feet, but I don't want to do things that make me essentially unhappy, and that's what I am.
If you allow me, I will leave this part in the conversation because
Sure.
I felt offended personally by seeing some elements of the attack on you.
But these are all the things which have made me become, tired of it. And I'm a very energetic person, but I also have a lot of other things to do. My students to talk to, my papers, my family, my music, my running. And I decided, hey, life is so much richer. Let's move on to something else. So it's like Cincinnato, no? At some stage, he left the Roman general and he went to his garden. I'm doing the same. As there's another battle, sometimes I may or may not be ready, but that's where I am in my garden.
Mother, you are being appreciated by so many, and as
Thank
Europe
you.
has to be resilient, you have to be resilient
Thank you, but sometimes it would be great also to have somebody saying, "Stop doing this," or to have some. So I've got broad shoulders, but sometimes to have people helping me out, that would be also appreciated. And instead at the institutional level, I had nobody coming in my support. No one.
Another issue which I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Jonathan Cantor and Lina Kant, and obviously one of the cases which epitomizes their cadence in both in US enforcers is DOJ Google case, where one of the features of this case appears to me, without reflecting on the substance, but the very mechanism, is that they received a lot of outsourcing from Google's main competitor, so to say. And do you think it's the way to go for the enforcers to engage with the main competitors who are the best in terms of providing the knowledge, expertise, and different things which are very difficult to collect, discover by the enforcers themselves?
So I think enforcers always do that in general. The relying on experts is necessary because with a few exceptions, enforcers don't have the expertise to deal with the complexity of some of the digital platforms we have to deal with. So that's useful, although also the experts have to so the expert in computer science have to speak in a jargon that can be understood, because otherwise they are in their own bubble. The evidence they can bring is very helpful. It's incomplete. Obviously, Google would say they have better information, which is probably true. But what's interesting is that they bring a different perspective. So the data may be more noisy, because they may be related to one smaller companies, and instead, obviously, Google would have a much bigger set of data and a much better view of the general situation. But these imperfect data are going to challenge some narratives of Google, which is helpful to the enforcers. So yes, this is necessary, especially in digital cases, because you want to be grounded on the facts, and if you don't have the facts, you're going to lose it against such a large company such as Google. What I thought was interesting in one of the two Google cases in the US, in particular the one with Judge Mehta being involved, is that on the one hand is, as we have said in the past, but it's worth reiterating, it's a vindication of the EC case, Android, because there are very similar commonalities there. So there is many of the practices which are being contested are almost a replica with some important differences too, but it's good. So, and it's good also at the political level that it cannot be said that the EU is anti-American. Remember about the big messages do matter. So because now you have America itself having doubts about their own digital giant. So that story that the EU is anti-American is less strong now. But I thought also was particularly interesting the way Judge Mehta saw, I don't know how will go, the possible remedies, which is instead was clearly something that we overlooked in the EU. Cease and desist never worked, is not working, and is never going to work. But we're still stuck there. So I don't know if it is differences in jurisdiction, but Judge Mehta presented in a holistic way an array of possible remedies which are going to the core, which is the monopolization case, and not just stop doing one practice and then you just start a whack-a-mole type of game that we're going to lose ultimately. So I really enjoyed that part too.
Exactly, and there are some interesting elements in the remedy, in the proposed remedies mechanism itself, which are worth noting for those doing research in this field. Another question I wanted to ask you, Tommaso, is related to Europe's kind of plans in the digital sphere. A lot is being said, and it's getting buzz a phrase that industrial policy has to be somehow factored into competition analysis, and many economists in particular, in my view, find a very elegant exit from this clash which has been proposed by the new reality, saying, well, the good industrial policy is more competition, which is in the ideal world is probably the case, but assuming that there must be some turbulences in trying to synchronize competition policy and industrial policy. And one of these turbulences is, and this is a kind of a question, can Europe function effectively in the following years without having its own, not necessarily consumer big tech, but somehow maybe cloud big tech or some infrastructure providers? Is scale necessary for digital markets to compete effectively in this kind of global constellation of powers?
So there's lots of things in your question. I'm going to answer in different stages. First, I will give you an example of which is in the old economy potentially, but not necessarily, but of a good interaction between industrial policy, competition policy, and I should say trade policy, because we cannot forget that too. It's very important nowadays, probably more important than the other two. Well, it's as important as the other. An example has to do, say, take the mandate of Ribera on something related to the environment, to the green agenda, etc., etc. So this is an industry which has different levels. At some levels, Europe has lost big time. Solar panels. Solar panels, we are far behind China, like ages. So this, for now, is something lost. So to do industrial policy in solar panels doesn't make any sense. But solar panels are important for our green agenda. So you want to adopt as much as possible solar panels, which means they should be cheap. That's where competition policy can help. And you don't want to impose tariffs on Chinese suppliers of solar panels. By the way, solar panels at the manufacturing level in Europe, and this is also, what do we want to promote? Something that matters for European citizens. It doesn't create many jobs. So we are adopters. Instead, installing solar panels creates many jobs. So this is really an industry where you don't want to go against China. You don't want to impose any tariffs. You want to have a thriving competition, cheap solar panels, adoption, great for the environment, great for lots of stuff, and jobs being created in Europe on the installation side. Okay, it's not great but then there are cars. There are electric vehicles, and cars is an existential industry for Europe. Think of Germany, think of France, think of Italy, and etc. This is where Europe is losing, okay? But it hasn't lost yet. Plus, Europe, through the car manufacturers, well, they employ a lot of people. There's still millions of jobs in that industry. So this is a priority of Europe, where you may want to do this combination of industrial policy, through subsidizing. I will return to the subsidies aspect, subsidizing the firms, imposing tariffs, and perhaps allowing some mergers that in itself they could be anti-competitive. If there is the scale which is needed, this is dynamically, it's going in the right direction. The alternative, if you don't do that, then dynamically speaking, Europe loses also that element in the value chain where they used to be strong. Jobs will be lost, there will be unemployment. Yes, there may be more Chinese cheap cars, but we have lost an important aspect of our industrial base. So there are different answers to different industries, and I wanted to, and I want to emphasize the impact on jobs as well, because without jobs, we will never be in a good space. On top of this, Europe has to add some coordination in terms of the subsidies they're offering. Currently, there is a plethora of uncoordinated subsidies to electric vehicles. Imagine you really want, maybe you're going to be wrong, but you're trying to give help to the car manufacturers to deliver, efficient electric vehicles, achieving the scale, etc., etc. But then you have one of the 27 member states which are subsidizing electric vehicles, through the demand side, which could be fine, without making any difference between the origin of the electric vehicle. So this money is going to be used to purchase Chinese electric vehicles. So if you have 27 different policies, they can undo the attempts to do something more coordinated at the supply side. So there is a great opportunity there. There is a great opportunity there if Europe takes the lead to coordinate, and perhaps this is the mandate of Ribeira where I'm more optimistic about. Sorry, I gave you a little bit of, but it's important to, so there is not a unique answer, but we have methods to think about this. The digital. Digital is very difficult. It's very difficult because we ignored all the signals we had 10, 15 years ago. All the digital infrastructure is virtually monopolized in Europe. It doesn't belong to European companies. So we are dependent on American companies completely. How to undo that, which is necessary for the economy and for the democracy? Well, I don't see it coming, but you need also there huge investments which come with a lot of red lines, a lot of strings attached. These investments, this is actually probably my biggest fear now I want to elaborate on. These investments, there is a serious risk that Europe will, splash money in digital AI because everybody's saying this, there is AI hype. Again, being based in the UK, you know that the Prime Minister here said the UK has to become the #1 in the world for AI. This means that money is going to be given, is going to be put aside and given to whom? Okay. The risk, which is already happening, is this money from the taxpayer is going to be given to the same dominant American companies that we currently have that will come to dominate the world even in the next 10 years. And this shouldn't happen. So we have to, so in my ideal world, we really have to say, Google, you get nothing. Microsoft, you get nothing. Amazon, you get nothing. Okay. They shouldn't get anything. They shouldn't. Unfortunately, they already are. Also because the political discussion with Musk and Trump, etc., has messed up this big time. But this shouldn't happen. The other thing that shouldn't happen, and I'm really concerned about, is our European data. So European data, these companies are there. They're putting all their, the centers for computation, etc., with European data in their centers, and so they are getting our transport data, our health data. This which they shouldn't, and nobody, as far as I know, is looking into this. And so this is a small opportunity, but there is also a potential for a disaster, which is monopolization and crisis of democracies in the next decade. Because if you think about it, well, these companies, if they become even bigger and they become even more essential infrastructure for everything, what the current American government wants is basically free speech. Okay, so no control and everything. So they're becoming more and more right wing. Elon Musk is a case in point. So paradoxically, you have like the Labour government, which in principle is a center-left government, finding themselves 4 years from now after having splashed billions of pounds into some AI thing, which is going to feed back into extra profits for the same digital companies, delivering even more concentrated platforms that give rise to, the next leaders in the UK, which is going to be Nigel Farage and the like. So this is the direction that the UK, and not only the UK, also Italy has taken, and it's not a good direction.
Moving on with how to do it. So I kind of I see the vision what to do. In terms of how to do it, there are two schools, let's say, more, but let us divide them by two. The one would be saying Europe has to do it in its own way. We are the pioneers in so many things. Let us do it in a kind of federated way where small companies, small and medium-sized companies will be collaborating, and we will be providing an umbrella infrastructure, and it will be kind of big tech, but with kind of democratic spirit, kind of, let's say, idealistic scenario. And more cynical scenario is just saying that, look, the only way to succeed is to scale up. It's painful, and in order to beat a monster, you have to become a monster, so to say. Which of these two extremes appears to be more realistic, more feasible, and more attuned with how you see the solution?
So more realistic is the latter, because this is what we're doing. This is what we're currently doing. This is the debate that you have in every conference, and you keep hearing this scaling up, scale, efficiency, etc., and all that. That is not what I want. So, so you can, the former, through leadership, through involving people, because there is lots of people outside actually the competition community which have thought about this very deeply, and it was also the origin of the internet was the openness was which we have lost, you know. So the business model, which was only made on advertising, was not there yet. It was a different community. So that spirit is not lost, and you have still it in civil society among computer scientists. So you need those guys back in the conversation. Of course, you need some scale, okay. I'm a bit critical and skeptical, I should say, about those who say that scale is the answer to everything, because I mean, an example I made several times, if scale was the answer to everything, then the Soviet Union would have won economically, because they were concentrating all production in one side and one side only, etc. And this hasn't worked, because there were lots of other downsides to it. And so the current companies, which are already so large, they are just extractive machines. So do you want to it's not just scale, it's also who gets the benefits of that scale, no? So, and the benefits don't go to us, to the citizens. So let's go back to our principle. So how do you want to communicate? How do you want to talk to each other? How do you want to commerce? How do you want to get informed, etc.? And how do we not want to be informed? How do we not want to communicate? So is it acceptable that all the, since more and more we are relying on some platform to get our news feeds, this is orchestrated by some people who have a commercial interest and political interest in a certain direction? This is not what we want. So we need to understand that we have become too much dependent on those American giants, and this is a terrible direction. There are also some simple recipes for competition authorities, although I don't see those being applied. No, structural presumptions. In AI, don't allow any further acquisition by these companies of anyone else. And instead, nobody's discussing about it. They're still doing the usual market definition where we don't know, it's not monetized. So all the mistakes that we have done in the old digital economy when it was coming to advertising since the mid-2000s, we are repeating them one for one now, 20 years later. All of them. So it's as if a lesson were not learned in a situation where instead we have evidence, plenty of evidence of what's happened next. We have evidence of what happened in the past and the level of concentration that this led to by being very permissive with those mergers. Plus, the situation is very different. So it's not like in the early 2000s where there were disruptors coming from a garage. The level of investment which are needed now in this space, you already have companies which are worth billions. Okay, so they're very large. So you don't have that entrepreneurial spirit any longer. So you have this complementarity between evidence and already concentration to start with, which to me is lending itself to a very simple solution. So they should not by anyone else. If they want to do the investments by themselves, they got the resources, they might have the incentives. By all means, I'm not imposing any line of business restriction, but acquisitions is something that we have overlooked, and we are still massively overlooking when it comes to artificial intelligence.
And looking retrospectively, how important these mistakes in being a little bit too permissive with merger control are on the state of affairs in competition policy? Will we repeat these mistakes in the future if the merger standards will remain as high as they currently are? Prohibition.
Well, in competition policy, merger policy is probably the most powerful tool. It may not be academically very challenging, but it's very relevant for the economy because abuse cases are so rare, they take so long, They are immaterial for the economy at the end, because you do 1, 2 per year, and it takes 7 years, and they're still in court. So somebody was telling me that Intel, who started, what, 2003, we are still in court 22 years later, so you can do the numbers. Instead, mergers could be much more effective because there are many, and they are more immediate, and they are, if you do merger policy well, they will prevent abuses from coming into the future. The evidence we have, and this is uncontested from my side, but you will have other people bringing different evidence. But the evidence on my side is that we allowed far too many. Those we allowed all increase the prices that didn't bring benefits or innovation. So this is the basis for changing some of the presumptions we have in this field. I should also say that if you don't want to go my paper against your paper, my evidence against your evidence, what's very clear to ordinary people is that the economy has become so concentrated in some parts of it that it's very easy to find disruption. So there was, I don't know, in the United States, when it comes to there was formula milk, that all of a sudden there was one plant that couldn't produce it and the prices exploded. So this is something that is very tangible. So if we had less concentrated economies, this wouldn't happen. And we have the same when it comes to pharmaceutical, to the pandemic, the war in Ukraine. So we have learned the hard way, the lessons, that by being over permissive with merger policy, we created very fragile economies because they rely on the overwhelming dominance of some companies. And everything goes well, it's great, but sooner or later things don't go well and things crumble very, very fast.
The DMA. We all remember the excitement with which this project has been introduced and welcomed by the community of European competition people. And now we somehow see a little bit of perhaps natural kind of waves of fatigue and some even criticism, even from those who've been expecting the DMA to function in from day one, etc. How do you evaluate the first year and a bit in terms of the enforcement of the new regime? Which trends have you started observing, and are you optimistic or rather skeptical about the future of the DMA regime?
I would love to be able to end on a positive note. It's very difficult. So what I've seen what some people predicted, that it's a great initiative in theory. It relies on good principles. Maybe a bit narrow because it's not very future proof, but at least it was a speedy exercise. So these are the good things. Europe came with a solution in a period of time which was much faster than some other people would have predicted. That's all good, but the resources which are employed are nowhere sufficient to handle the problem. So on the enforcement side, there is it's not just a risk, there is a serious plausibility that we end up with the same problems we had in competition policy. So endless litigations, and already the commission is being taken to court. Endless litigation, and then a sort of compliance reports. So the companies will flood the commission. So a little bit this excessive bureaucratization we had also with GDPR. Again, the spirit was great, but the essence was violated every time because you just do this box ticking exercise. So that's where I fear we currently are, and I hope to be proven wrong, and I would like to see whether there's going to be more openness. The problem of the DMA, though, that even those which instead are still very much in favor of it, and I am in favor of it, by the way. I would like just to see more enforcement with better trained people, with more competent people there, and not just a legal mentality, which is what's unfortunately I seem to be observing right now. But it doesn't do anything to tackle the sources of the problem, which is the monopolization of core elements. And so you still will have in search, in electronic commerce, in social networks, in the cloud, you will have incredible dominance that the DMA by its own nature doesn't tackle. It's not indirectly by trying to, you know, slowly and steadily to introduce some competition and more openness at the margins, but that core monopolization is still there and will be there even with an effective implementation of the DMA.
This leads us a little bit back to the question which we discussed earlier, a kind of more instrumentalized approach to enforcement of competition policy. Do you think there is anybody, any company on the horizon with European kind of background which can meaningfully inform, steer, channel the enforcement team towards choosing the modality of enforcement which would somehow benefit new entrants and also passing the test of the country of origin of this new entrants, because it may well be that we will be fighting one big tech jurisdiction versus the not less kind of problematic for European values and interests jurisdiction.
I don't know because I'm not following this too closely. I believe there are. I've seen initiatives in Brussels led by other people, Francesca Bria and others, that have brought to the discussion companies, tech companies, which are active in that sphere. I haven't had the opportunity of talking to them specifically, but there is much more in European tech than people think. I don't know if these voices are heard by the Commission. I hope they are, but just again, I'm not involved. It's very important. It's something that you said earlier, that in this discussion we hear not just from those which are making complaints because there is already an antitrust case, but we hear from this ecosystem which is very, very rich. But then the competition authority should not do the same mistakes that they are still doing, which is as soon as one of those actors emerges, that they are swallowed and bought by the American companies. So this is something which is so myopic, and I don't know why we're not defending our entrepreneurs and our infrastructure. So and I'm honestly and truly European, and I want jobs to remain in Europe, and I don't want, even as an economist, that whatever the great effort of these guys, that if they sell out, they may become rich, but by becoming rich, they just reinforce the dominance, the market power of a company, which is not there to do the good for society, but to do their own profit. So this will just reinforce the extracting machine that these companies are. So where is the benefit for us? I don't see. Instead, you have to be brutal, cut any possibility to grow by merger of these dominant companies. Simple recipe.
If you look at other jurisdictions, this question has two sides, maybe. One in terms of enforcement, best enforcement practices, and the second one in terms of scaling up, with a caveat that you are quite skeptical about this holistic belief in scaling up as mantra. But do you see some very interesting examples which Europe at least has to be mindful of in terms of how to grow and in terms of how to regulate and shape and channel the growth?
So let's think about some example coming from the global south. And I'm not an expert of that. It's just something I heard about, and I've been looking, but on a superficial basis, so I may well be wrong, but it's interesting. So some countries decided to, maybe because there was a different political alignment, and because politics does matter, and values and views in that respect are always driving some particular agendas. But the governments of Mexico, the governments of Brazil, in recent years, their leftist governments, they decided to try to undo some very strong links that the government had with some dominant American companies, in particular Microsoft. So they realized that by relying on those companies, not only it would be extremely expensive, but again, they would abdicate on their own sovereignty. So they decided, and this had also problems, not to use Microsoft in any government office any longer, for instance. Okay, imagine, I mean, these are important things politics that may mess up completely for a bit the system, but may also give, imagine how big Mexico and Brazil are, opportunities to other companies to grow and thrive. So, but there was a political decision, which was a very tough one. So this is not going to come from the antitrust enforcers, of course, but if it is a whole of government approach, this is some good procurement of that stuff for, imagine, every hospital in a country, every school in a country or something like this is not going to use, I don't know, Google any longer, is not going to use Microsoft any longer. That's a big thing. That's a big thing. So public procurement can be an enormous leverage, which has scale and can become the seed for something else. The government of India did also something similar with payment systems. They introduced UPI. They were scared of a different kind of concentrated market. It was the duopoly of MasterCard and Visa. And they invested very heavily in a new infrastructure, which, though they didn't supervise well, and it has replaced a duopoly of American companies, Google and MasterCard, with a duopoly of Google Pay and Walmart for some reasons in India. So I'm not sure how well that played out in the end. But it was an attempt which was led by the central bank. Okay, so you have different actors, but there was also the competition authorities involved. But there was a big plan, the big plan to do that. So these are initiatives that, if you're a bit, not short-sighted, they can become very interesting, generally speaking, but also specifically in the tech space. Do I see this coming in Europe? So far, no. I haven't seen anybody even thinking about it at the level of the competition authorities. If anything, here in the UK, I see the opposite. The CEO of Microsoft UK is advisor of Keir Starmer on innovation. So this is even making it closer, the ties between the digital giants and the government. So this is where my skepticism is not just by nature, is just informed by the directions and the signals I see in these markets and in politics, which I think are terribly misplaced.
So this electoral cycles, 4 years, 5 years, electoral cycles, alongside with fragmented composition of the European Union itself, are pivotal and are unchangeable elements, or are they something which require, and so we have to somehow to adopt to the European situation, or is it something which requires the revision, these fundamental elements or pillars of European Union, member states, and the EU itself require somehow recalibration in some sense as well?
It does require some serious thinking. Is it coming from the Leiden Commission? I doubt it. It's so easy to undo a European project if you have a member states such as Hungary, Italy, and a few others, because you can divide and conquer from the inside, and this is already happening. So a case in point, just because it's recent, but to show how all over the place, unfortunately, the conversation is, and it's difficult to stick to your principles in this context. Take a recent case involving Italy, Iran, and the US. What has this to do with our conversation? Well, I'll try to explain. There was a journalist, Cecilia Sala, that was arrested wrongly in Iran. And this arrest came a few days after Italy had arrested an Iranian engineer, because the United States wanted that Iranian engineer that happened to be passing through Italy with allegation of terrorism. Okay? So apparently he might have supplied a technology for some drones that then were used for a deadly attack against American troops. So this is the prequel. So the US wants to arrest a guy, the guy's in Italy, then Iran retaliates against Italy and arrests unjustly a journalist. Then what you observe is that Meloni goes to the United States. Italy, historically in these things, has always done whatever it takes to bring back our guys. So you pay the money, you pay the ransom, you do everything. And also on this occasion, it was clear that Italy wanted the journalists, rightly so, to be freed as soon as possible. But the US, remember, has this other person in Italy that want them to be extradited. So how do you cope with the bargaining chip? So you have Meloni going to Mar-a-Lago informing first Biden, then taking a deal with Trump, saying, look, we need the journalists. We are going to return a few days later, so it's not so obvious, but we are going to return the journal, the engineer that you say it's a terrorist, but sorry, this is not. I mean, so we need to do that because that's our bargaining chip. Okay, she was allowed. In the meantime, she speaks to Musk, who has and she goes back to Italy and announces that Italy is going to spend $2 billion on satellite links, which are owned by Elon Musk. So they wanted something back, and something back is billions of dollars that we are going to give as Italian taxpayers to the richest man on earth. Whether that is needed or not, we don't know. It's for for security and defense. But that tells you that the discussions now is a different one. Is a different one. We are in that world. We have to coexist in that world, but we have to be, very focus on this dimension to be able to call them out if they exist, but we have to follow them. Otherwise, as I said, competition policy is nearly dead, and it's been irrelevant. It's becoming even more irrelevant in this context. So my concerns are backed up by some. Maybe this example doesn't resonate well with your audience, but it's something that I thought it was so obvious that it would be interesting to report it back. And you got other examples. A few months ago, maybe a bigger thing at the European level. Elon Musk is again saying, if you're going to enforce the DSA, because he doesn't like it because of freedom of speech, etc., etc., well, the US will pull out of NATO. So this is bargaining at unprecedented, with threats at unprecedented levels, and it's happening. It will be happening. And this is why I want to return to one point I mentioned earlier. We will have to negotiate with the United States a lot, okay? But you can negotiate only if you have something in your hand. If you have nothing in your hands, you basically abdicate on everything. So you just take it or leave it, and we have to take it, whatever they're asking us to do. So without infrastructure, without our data, we are going to lose everything. So we should start, even if it is a bit inefficient at first, to have our own infrastructure, fence our data that should not go to the US ever, with health and transport and other things, keep it for us. And because then it becomes something valuable. And on that basis, then you can have a more fair bargaining discussion with the United States that will exist, of course. I don't think that we will never be in this frictionless world, but first you have to start building up something of substance. If you don't build up, you don't go anywhere.
Well, I know you have to go, but the tradition is tradition. Recommendation to students who are doing this, who are planning to do this in the future years.
Recommendation for students, this is a bit parochial, but for instance, in my recent research, I tried to join industrial economy with political economy. I think this has been vindicated, if you want, with experience coming from the US with Trump and Musk. So I think this is a very interesting area. I would like to have more people bringing data, bringing theories to how to join political economy with a traditional industrial organization, because markets and politics are so intertwined that we need to take that into account.
Tommaso Valletti, thank you very much indeed for your open, sincere, and deep analysis of so many things today.
Pleasure, as always.